some people that I have seen canvassing for power who are only interested in the rhetorics, in the fanfare of the office, and then in the opportunities open for them to make bulgier pockets. We have nothing to do with that. It's unscientific, it's very inhuman, is unexpected of any person to support such persons and such a drive under any guise to provide the next leadership. The next leadership should be prepared to be laborers, to be innovative, to go into the dust, to be very practical, to abandon the lofty tower and join the people in making Nigeria be. So that when your institutions comes, when empowerment in the real sense of it, against the tiny little peanuts that goes into the hands of people that has no meaning in today's inflation rating, the tiny little amount being given to people actually is, to me, I look at it as him that smokes. Once you buy the cigarette with your money and then lit it on fire and then smoke and the smoke goes, neither the smoke nor the cigarette will remain at the end of the day. The cigarette will go away, the cigarette will burn out, the smoke will disappear, and at the end of the day, you are left less, and it's also affecting your health. That's the greed in Nigeria. They steal from you, they invest outside. They steal from you, they tell you lies. They steal from you, they misrepresent you. They steal from you and call you names. They steal from you and see you as animals and give you tiny little things and when election comes. They steal from you and present themselves as holier than thou. They are making fool out of the society. Such people are not needed. By definition in any law, such person or persons who have such qualities are regarded as enemies of state. For example, you take any of these countries that Nigerians are always quick to talk about in copying their democracy there from, or laws, or social supportive programs. You take at any of them and you go to display 5% of such conduct as they do in power. They will end up in prison, they will never be statesmen, and they'll be treated as enemies of state. So until such a time where the entire general population of Nigeria will be sensitized to know, these are expectations of leadership at all levels. Anything short of this, be on your feet. Kick them out of power. I'm not promoting insurgency. I'm not promoting treason. But all I'm saying is what the law is expected of a leader. That's why you see when they come to campaign, and when you see them frowning at the provisions of the law from the expectations of a leader, and the moment a person or persons frown at what is expected of him to exhibit to the people, then get to know that he is one of such deceits and you never can rely upon.
All right. Interesting one. I mean, you pulled up quite a number of issues, but I think we should just go straight to talk about this because we've been talking about laws, and for any government, or especially our democracy, we know that the number one law is the 1999 Constitution that guides the affairs, of every person, whether political or not. But you also realize that a lot of people, even at the moment, have a challenge with that law. First of all, they believe that it is not a law that was concocted by the generality of the people, but by a select few, and hence does not capture the realities of the Nigerian state. Let me take it one by one. So, please quickly tell us, what do you think about, some people said we should replace the 1999 Constitution, have an entirely brand new law. Some people believe, well, we can just dust it up and then correct the gray areas and, begin to use that law. But what would you do, especially since a lot of people take advantage of that now, especially the rich and powerful in the country? It doesn't work for them. I mean, it doesn't practically work for them. It only works for the ordinary people, that is when the law works. So what do you do, especially if you are given the opportunity to lead? Would you erase that law, create a new one that is workable and that can bring all Nigerians, into one single basket?
I thank you for this question. Prior to even talking about the Constitution of the Federation 1999, that is how it is called, Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I'm not a lawyer, but many even lawyers do say so in court to be able to call it easy. If you say 1999 Constitution, it means a constitution belonging to 1999. But Constitution of the Federation, 1999. A law promulgated in 1999 for Nigeria. That is the true definition of it. First of all, I am one person who believe that we are completely wrong from 1977 and 78. For us to have established a team, and because we wanted America to come closer to us, to now be seen to pick presidential system, American style, 100%, and then brought the same system to the fore. One of the ingredients of lack of failure that brought friction, where Nigerians saw it bear in the conduct of the President Shagari's administration, was because the entire thing was strange. And they were grappling with it to have finished the first term. And when the second term came 3 months after, so many institutions found themselves dead, even though there were accusations of greed, by the same country initially that gave that same presidential system for us to have copied. They played a role in bringing Nigeria using a particular word, condomania, abusing politicians. So at that time, that was the history. But to me, some of us believe in looking at the world, just common sense. The greatest ally of United Kingdom today in the world is United States. But yet, United Kingdom is operating parliamentary system. And the closest ally in the whole world is operating presidential system. What are the differences? What are the reasons? We didn't sit down to, from the point of view of political science, examine the two and where they are operating separately. And we didn't also realize that looking at NATO as a whole, in each there are differences in their own laws governing their countries. And the question is why? Why should you be a copycat? A country that has culture, history, our own historical backgrounds, the diversity in us, that is strength, the resources before us, and then the level of education and awareness of our people. That is to inform your own democratic setting. But you abandoned that and went to pick something totally strange to your people. Let me tell you about the presidential system, US. One of the major cardinal points that brought about it was what? Was the issue of immigration, immigrants and citizens. Until tomorrow, that is the yardstick, that is the major anchor point. Everybody came from different parts of the world, met the indigenes who are the Red Indians, and they displaced the Red Indians, fought them, and established a law that is protective of immigrants. An immigrant can come from anywhere and become anything you want to be in America. You require a system that is democratic, that will be protective to you against the citizenry. That's why any Red Indian you see till tomorrow, all their leaders, the moment you sit with them and talk about this phrase, you will be seen to be a friend. And I quote, "One day, and before the world will learn, charity engine will return." You know the meaning? That is the hope, that is the aspiration of them coming back to their land and taking charge of their land. They have not lost of it. How old is the American democracy today? Some 200 years plus. But the dream in the typical Red Indian is there. One may ask, are they totally captured in the law? We have not sat down to now look at the laws or the type of system we are copying for Nigeria. We have not looked at it deeply. Our own team that left in 1977 or 78, I think, ahead of 1979 when power was handed over to the then NPN, Shagari's government then, there were teams that went to America, copied from, and drafted the laws, constitution for Nigeria. That aside. Even when in the 90s, 1996, 1997, when the Constituent Assembly sat, numerous issues were presented to the Assembly, including taking our culture, including taking our history, and then look at Nigerians from every perspective, and taking our diversity as a cardinal point here, where every single sector, every single tribe, every single aspect of our history that brought us together as in our country should be captured. And that was done. Justice Karibi Wade was the chairman or president, was the one presiding. And I know some of us, the roles we played behind the curtain. I was the secret coordinator on activities they desire from what was being tabulated as subjects. He died, may so rest in peace. He spoke about this when we paid him a visit. I think it was in the year 2018 with some of us here. We went, and then he was able to have spoken out on the roles we played in bringing it out. Unfortunately, after the death of General Abacha, some certain portions that are critical on keeping Nigeria together and keeping Nigerians' sense of belonging, and then keeping this country intact with that sense of unity, with everybody playing a role. And I give you a tiny little example. In Nigeria, you cannot look at leadership provision in whatever type of system you are bringing under the guise of democracy without knowing that traditional institution was there much earlier than what you have in NATO. In many countries in NATO, if you look at history, if you are a student of history, during the barbaric age in Europe, as at that time, our traditional rulers and people were already clothed, and there was a system of governance from traditional institutions. So today, you sit down and look at that chunk, that part of your history, and decided to have a constitution that now decided to exempt such classes and say they have no role to play. That is dangerous. That to me is shallow-mindedness. That to me does not reflect something that is supportive democracy, and that is something that will allow the democracy to last long in itself. Why was it removed? Look at US. And look at the arrangement of convenience. Yet it allowed them to say, yes, you have a governor, correct. You have legislatures at the state and at the federal level, correct. You have chairmen of local government, correct. But every city and every state must have a mayor. The traditional rulers you have are mayors you require. The powers of mayor are supposed to be now looked at, which we did in the 90s, and are given to the traditional rulers. Identification of their sons from their own domains are part of their roles, giving them identity. They have roles to play with regional or district and then zonal security up to national level as being supportive to the main state, to the security of the state in America. In Nigeria, all our traditional rulers are just there at the mercy of their local government chairman. And even the little percentage that was created was the only thing left. And we created it in the 90s for them to have as captured by the Constitution. The question is, why do we exempt them? Another thing is being Africa and knowing fully well that investing strategic in the younger ones against tomorrow, in their education, their activities, skill acquisition, empowerment. The question is, where is it captured in the Constitution? You want to have democracy, but in one side, the democracy has exempted some that are part of the ingredients of promotion of exigency. How can you have peace? So some of us haven't studied this much and haven't conducted our researches this much. If you have to now have Nigeria that will allow democracy to be deeply rooted, you should be seen to touch on these aspects that are abandoned by our Constitution. We have to look at it, and I know there are also other areas. Campaign has not started. There are areas I will not talk about that we intend to introduce that we will all be proud of. After all, not a single person comes to look at correction in terms of governance or a law that governs a country. It is a collective team, and we have been on this for a long time. And to me, some certain people decided in 1999 that you are talking about to have removed some certain portions that was engraved in it. But then they decided to expunge them to suit personal interests. It's unacceptable, undemocratic. Also, it is unpatriotic for Nigeria's security. Nigeria's democratic practice is also unacceptable for the opportunities to be seen to be allowed for any citizen to aspire to come to the fore. It was done on personal interest by some people that you refuse to question.
All right. Sorry, just let me just get this. So a lot of people talk about restructuring, and it is now a campaigning message for every candidate, across the political parties. And it's been like that, successive governments will talk about restructuring. And this particular administration, for example, spoke about it before they came into power. When they got into power, it became, ambiguous to them. I mean, there were certain people started saying, we don't even know what you mean by restructuring. It means different things to different people. But I think the closest to it was a lot of people say, why don't we go back to 1963, where the regions thrived, where these regions could manage their resources effectively and decide, what style they want to engage in, maybe their education or what exactly they want to focus on. But a lot others say, well, restructuring definitely means different things to different people, especially now. I would like to have your idea of restructuring. Where should we be looking at?
Let me, with all sense of humility, to different groups, different people, given different definitions of the word restructuring, looking at Nigeria. This one I have just talked about is restructuring. But what is restructuring when you are looking at a country? Where in the real sense of it, in leadership provision and then in democratic investment, the word restructuring started. It started in 1786 or so in United Kingdom. Meaning the elders, those who are considered to have the wisdom and the knowledge and been associated with the kings, came together to have discussed their future. And that discussions of the future is a strategic planning of what they expect their country to be in relation to the rest of the world. That is the set goal. That set goal is now the direction upon which generations and generations to come should be seen to build their country therefrom. Meaning a direction has now been defined by the elders and the wisest in the land. That was restructuring, and that was the beginning, and that was the birth of the beginning from United Kingdom. And the next that did it was France, around 18-something, I cannot vividly remember, but it is in the 18th century, early part of it. They also sat down and worked out their own with a clear direction of what France should stand for, including their resources. Here, investment in a typical French person, investment in companies, directing them to go into the world and now bring resources back to their country, and then for them to always look inward. And whatever they have, from human resource to capital resource, all put together, should be seen to be colonized into making it French, to be for them, of them, by them. Correct? Then also after France, then one country that thrived to do the same is America. And that is one of the youngest ones in terms of restructuring. The elders in America, that's why up to today you look at Democrats and you look at Republicans. That's why till tomorrow they are talking of the wisest one, of the elders. If you look at the activities in their assembly in the Capitol Hill, you will see them always making referrals of their founding fathers. The statements and the outline that was documented, kept by their founding fathers, was the restructuring, meaning the rail upon which America's democracy is resting upon and is making her journey upon. That is their own restructuring. After America comes where? Comes China. China, Mao Zedong and the rest sat down and looked at their labor force and look at communism and look at other ingredients where every part of China is to be represented forever. And they will not be influenced by any force or any democracy anywhere else other than their culture, other than their history. It's like the old dynasties that make China all looking inwards, with all their leaders fully represented, and when then with their population, the size they came out, even as at that time, early 40s, early 90s, I think, no, early 40s, China had her own. And it was that direction that was said, that is what is regarded as restructuring, making referrals to the set goal direction by China into our economic life, social life, security, protection and sustenance of the spirit and principles of communism till this moment. And then the next after that is where? Indonesia. And this other country close to Indonesia, where Singapore. These two came up and sat down and charted their own. This is the most recent that people are looking at books. The latest I can tell you is the book written by him. What is it called? From third to first. The ingredients that form their direction core restructuring is right there. But in Nigeria, we have totally different definition and understanding of the word restructuring. And it differs from one zone to the other, one political party to the other, one association to the other, one activist group to the other. But the history of restructuring, the whole world over, I have told you where it started and I have told you where it is. In Nigeria, when do we get that done? How do we get it done? It is very easy. If you take away selfishness, if you take away mutual suspicion, if you take away abuses of right, if you take away with all sense of humility, ignorance out of some people, and if you take away the fact that some people are being driven by greed, looking at issues in Nigeria and how to maximize stealing from the resources, opportunities created for them in Nigeria. Some are in high positions. Some are our contemporaries trying to rise up. Some are in the younger ones. This idea of stealing out of what we have, meaning the dirtiest aspect of greed, has already gotten itself into some certain people. With all sense of humility, some people used to say, if you can beat them, join them. So join them in stealing. You don't need such ideas. You don't need such stories to be told to our younger ones. If God has created you here in Nigeria, He expects the best out of you being exhibited in this country, and that is what we stand for. I have given you a little journey of history of restructuring in the life of democracy in the world, and I also told you about the misgivings or misapplications of services in our constitution and where we are today. So if we are settled with the responsibility of providing leadership to Nigeria tomorrow, we know what to touch to carry everybody along and on board. That doesn't mean we will not listen to ideas. And remember, during our time, God Almighty gave us the wisdom in creating zones for Nigeria, in adding states to stabilize, in adding local governments, in adding wards to every state in the country. So we have done that preparatory to having a constitution that will be complementary. The idea here is to carry all along. And the 6 zones have common histories. If you look deeply, they have common environments. They also have common mission. That's why if you sit down and look at Nigeria, and then you are now to spread activities in leadership, every single zone have some certain peculiarities that the rest of the world don't have. So we are undermining who we are. So we sat down and looked carefully, including agriculture. And people don't believe that we have gone. You can take any profession in life and look at each zone and then see what they are endowed with, different from the rest. For example, South-South. If you take South-South, the investment America do have, minus oil, minus gas, keep that aside, minus capacity to, even though unfortunately some oil companies are into environmental activities that is polluting the environment, the resources from the fish. No, that aside. A typical Southerner has all the qualities expected of a Marine. America spends fortune to train one Marine. But in South-South, naturally they have natural qualities of Marine. So were Nigeria to be United States, they wouldn't spend much more money as it is to produce a single Marine. That is cost saving. And that is productivity. And you can teach the whole world. So every Southern person that is opportune to have been created there, the environment by association, by activities, by training, by whatever activities you do that will see you grow up, you are naturally a Marine person. If you are, for example, in Northeast, naturally you are a mountain expert, mountain warfare expert. But it is the environment that taught you to be so. If you are in Northwest, naturally you are a desert warfare material. You don't have to go to spend much time. If you are from North Central, for example, you are also an expert in logistics. By nature, by our history, and by our activities. If you are from Southwest, for example, by nature, You are into psychological warfare and you are into medicine, and you can provide the best in any aspect of warfare. Southeast, by nature, you are a jungle warfareist, which is one of the most difficult things to be. You are a survivalist by their environment, by their culture, by their training. And that's why you see it's only in Southeast you see people, no matter the difficulties, no matter what, they know how to live alone. You go in the middle of nowhere, you just see a mansion. For him and his family, he's not afraid of anything. He's a survivalist, he's a jungle warfareist, is by history and by culture and by environment. So many bigger armies around the world are spending fortunes to create such qualities. We have by nature, and we do not appreciate who we are. And then there are some other parts of Nigeria that are by nature also talented in terms of feeding the world. Our soil is there for us. For example, some people will say, why did you zone south-south the way it is? But I tell you, you don't need, I'm now talking agriculture in terms of feeding ourselves. One of the examples, and I will stop here. One of the examples here is looking at every zone. You'll be amazed. It took a long time. It took assessments. It took practical exercises. It took researches. It took people to the environment to say, one single mixture of fertilizer is a disservice to Nigeria. It promotes desertification from the north and soil erosion in the south. So every zone should also be seen to have their soils tested, fertilizer adjusted to the deficiencies of the soil. Then you have maximum productivity. You will have also soil protection from it. But people don't understand why in the 90s we participated in making Nigeria divided into 6 zones. It's for numerous reasons. That to me is also structure. For example, the current fertilizer being supplied across one single mixture for the entire country. If you continue with it in the next 50 years, it will be a sorry side. You will be importing food. You will not be growing food. You can quote me. I said this. And so take every aspect of life and look at each of these zones. It is an investment.
So, every answers you've given prior to this question I'm about to ask has anchored on insecurity, security challenge, security challenge, which leads me to this. Arms proliferation has bedeviled our society. What's your view? What's your view?
One of the answers I can give you that may shock you is to start by looking at the histories of rigging activities in Nigeria. Rigging brought so many desperados in politics into importing arms and arming their own thugs to fight another party or other thugs across Nigeria. And when it started in the late 70s, nobody checkmated that. And another thing that brought this hopelessness in where people will canvass for, get the support of the people, but at the end of the day, the queuing of people to vote for Mr. A or Party A, at the end of the day will have a contrary result, brought about people becoming desperate to know that we can fight it out. And that's why at any time you have had elections, until this moment, you can quote me, I say, until this moment. And that is one thing I haven't heard Nigerians talked about. You have insurgency, but you never sit down to say, what are the sources of supply of arms into the hinterland and to the wrong hands? What are the sources into the hinterland that is bringing in arms and ammunition that has created so many unknown armories from north to south? And there are too many of them, and it's scary. Today, there is not a single agency in Nigeria that can give you figures as to an estimate of arms in wrong hands or armories across Nigeria that are illegal, meaning that is not government's own. So at every single time there is election or there was election, you see the agencies were used. Now it's time for us to talk about it raw. Let me give 1979. In 1979, unfortunately, police were used to be able to tilt election elsewhere. And then it was in that process, at that material time, now police discovered between late hours and the early hours of the next day, stuffing boxes is a difficult thing to do that has to provided to all the polling stations in Reagan. Police discovered that no matter the stimulants you take, cola nut, coffee, ink on your right and paper on your left, going this way, will not stop you from going to sleep. This is how much we have invested in Reagan. But they discovered that once you take the ink with a rubber band and tie it on your head, once your hand can come on top of your head to a ballot paper, without stimulants you can't sleep. This is discovery out of illegality on how to cheat ourselves. But then that hurt a lot of other parties at that material time. And people say, when next election comes, I will fight it out and I must emerge. That idea was into people. There was no reorientation. There was no address to the abuses. Cases were taken to court. The aggrieved were not addressed, were not compensated, were not assured. And another election came. The same thing happened. As far back as all the elections we have had, they all have their own histories. I'm not going to talk about that now, but every single election had had abuses meted to it. And we have gotten that documented. Most unfortunately. Some today are having direct connection with the current situations in Nigeria. Arms in wrong hands, drugs in wrong hands, armor is kept for them as and when the situation dictates. You go and take arms and fight. You fight fellow Nigerians because of political interests, not national peace. So you have people who are looking for power, but from the money they have stolen, from the abuses meted to the country yesterday, and from the bulgy pockets they now finance people into creating more problems, in promoting more causes of insurgency in Nigeria's stability. Some of us are aware of this, and we have documented a lot of history, a lot of activities in our researches, and we believe we can address it, particularly investing in the younger ones, in reorienting them to now be seen as investments for tomorrow's activities in democracy.
Your Excellency, just to build up on this question, you know, this government especially talk more about proliferation, and then they usually refer to Libya and the breakdown of order, which has actually made the Lake Chad basin and the entire Sahel region, porous. Especially in this government, most of the reports have been that the breakdown in Libya, has caused the proliferation to travel down, to Nigeria, from Niger to Chad and all of that. It seems that narrative seems to negate, what you just said.
Absolutely.
I want you to tell us about that part, of our security challenge, where arms come into the country.
Ordinarily, I don't like delving into it, but out of education, and I think there is the need for us to talk about this. One may ask, what is the population of Libya? What is the population of their armed forces? What is the size, what is the strength of their own armed forces? Army, Navy, Air Force. What are their arms holdings? How can Libyan arms holdings be seen to supply the whole West Africa and North Africa? Is that a cover story? What's the quantity? Arms supplied to Libya are documented. They keep them in their armories. The countries that supplied them are known. And from serial this to serial this are there. The intelligence bodies in Nigeria and around the whole world, they do that. Once you take a weapon and then look at the number, you'll be able to know who manufactured it and for whom and when. And whose own armory is this supposed to be. I know there was breakage into their armories. I know there were rebels in Libya. But the number of rebels that emerged, a census was taken by United Nations. And they discovered in Tripoli alone, there were 301 rebel groups. I repeat, 301 rebel groups, a census taken by United Nations. These 301 are different rebel groups. They fight themselves. The question is, the arms are also not enough for them. What is the balance that came to West Africa? Who is involved in creating that story? who is involved in arms importation, illegal, and arming his people that give us as a cover story. So that's why you see, once you see a political body or a country given a story, don't take it, look at it, x-ray it, and make sense. God has given you the capacity to ask questions and look for answers. I tell you today, with all sense of humility, none part of our borders is fully manned. There is no port today in Nigeria that can say, we have inspected all the containers coming to us and we issue them certificate of being arms free. None. I challenge you, none. It was of recent that some of us talked about scanners and became a challenge. So some of the bodies responsible for that, only last 2 weeks, they now became serious and began to say scanners have been imported and they are on their way. They said so. But we asked the questions. But arms have been coming in unabated. And there was a time also early this year when some of us, in trying to now identify this aspect of arms proliferation and then understanding the sources of promotion of insurgency in Africa, we discovered an Asian country that was importing a gun called AA, anti-aircraft guns, most dangerous. But then they discovered the weaknesses in Nigeria and in bringing these anti-aircraft guns, bigger, with bigger bullets that can bring down any aircraft, no matter the size. But Nigeria is their own transit point. So when the buyers in Nigeria collect them, they were also helping in transiting them to 3 other countries plus Nigeria, making 4. Mali, Mozambique, and Congo DRC. Congo DRC, Mozambique, Mali, and Nigeria, 4 of them, nothing more. But you know, in the aviation world, once rebels or bandits, as we have, or Boko Haram, began to get themselves armed much more with anti-air defense guns, then it is evident the aviation authority world over may declare your airspace what? A safety question. So you may be declared a no-flying zone. It happened before to Chad when rebels were fighting, and they took a lot of anti-aircraft guns in their hands. So the whole world, all aircrafts were to bypass Chad in going to wherever they were, until sanity was restored with the president that was killed lately. So in Nigeria, there is much more from the international market coming through our waters into us, coming through our borders into us. And one shameful thing I will tell you,